process began a few months ago when there was a list of 3 that was sent out. And from that, the RBI's approval have come in for Mr. Jagdishan. Now, whether he was the first choice or not, everybody believes he was. But joining us to talk about the transition is Suresh of Macquarie. We've got Amit Tandon also of IiAS joining us. So let's get straight into it. Thank you both so much for taking the time to speak to us. Suresh, I'll come straight to you. I've seen a number of reports from you ahead of this transition. So let me just ask you what you make of it. Is this the best case scenario according to you?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, was greatly expected because if you were to look at even in analyst conference calls, it was portrayed as if Sashi is going to be the next CEO. Having said that, and Mr. Puri had also hinted that the guy has worked with me for 25 years and stuff. That is my first preference. So it really looks like an external candidate was not the first choice. Having said that, I think the environment in which we are operating, I think it makes more sense to have an insider getting appointed as the CEO and continue with the existing strategies that Mr. Puri had put in place in order to ensure continuity and stability. Otherwise, I think we don't want to really upset the getting a new guy and trying to completely change something which is really working well for the bank. So I think in the current context, it's really been a good appointment, is what our view is.
Amit, first thoughts from you. Again, internal versus external, somebody who's worked closely with the outgoing CEO. I guess from a market perspective, certainly, is confidence boosting, but from a governance perspective as well.
Look, at the end of the day, there's no correct answer in terms of internal versus external. What you want to do is you want to have a process which is well run. And, admittedly, after the first initial hiccup when, HDFC seems to have been pushed to the wall, or the bank, HDFC Bank seems to have been pushed to the wall and said, okay, you better have a succession process in place because otherwise we're not going to approve the names of the EDs which you've sent. It seems to have been there. There's been some amount of communication which has been happening. Of course, the way the whole process runs, I have some views about it in terms of 3 names going to the RBI, which are then kind of shared in the public. There's a huge, I guess there's a more heated debate among market participants than there might well be in RBI. I don't like that process, but yeah, the fact is that we've had someone 2-3 months before seems to suggest that the bank and the markets can put this behind and move on and wait for the handing over of the baton and the bank kind of continuing to run or sprint depending on how you've seen it in the past.
Suresh, would you, as an analyst, would investors have preferred if this was something which had been mapped out over years? I asked because at one time it was actually thought that Paresh Sutankar was the obvious choice, but then he exited in a hurry, and that's what led to this whole debate over who comes next and whether the bank had planned succession appropriately. But maybe from the outside we all read it wrong. Maybe that was never the plan, and what is playing out now was.
No, so look, things like in India, succession planning is non-existent. So let's admit that Mr. Puri, in one of the open investor meets, very clearly alluded to the fact that given a choice, if Reserve Bank of India extends the age from 70 to 75, then what are we talking about succession planning? I'm going to run the bank for another 5 years. I go to office at 9 o'clock and I go for a lunch at 1 o'clock and then I go back home at 5 o'clock. So why should I not take the job for another 5 years, right? So the point here is nothing was in the works, to be very honest, even when Paresh quit. And things were pretty uncertain with respect to whether Reserve Bank of India would increase the age by another 5 years. There was a lot of debate happening around. We don't know whether Mr. Puri or anybody else actually was retiring at the age of 70 approached Reserve Bank of India. But then when things were very clear that RBI was unrelenting and not going to extend the age beyond 70, clearly they had to look for a candidate within the firm or outside the firm. And I think in terms of due diligence, I think a reasonable amount of due diligence has been done. Shamla Gopinath, anyways, the chairperson, was there on the board of the bank. And then Reserve Bank of India, unfortunately, whatever is the rules are that you can submit 3 names. Those 3 names cannot be out in the public domain. The press and the media lands up getting the names, but as per the compliance of Reserve Bank of India, those 3 names are not supposed to be disclosed. We have to give a preference to the Reserve Bank of India, number one, number two, number three. RBI has a very high-handed approach towards the selection of candidates. They will not tell whether they went by number one, number two, number three. They will directly tell whom they want to get appointed as the CEO. So unfortunately, that's how the system is. It is less transparent. The regulator works that way, and Sashidhar Jagdishan perhaps was the first choice for the management, and of course, Reserve Bank of India has accordingly approved it. So I won't be too iffy about the kind of process that HDFC Bank followed, in my view.
Amit, 2 points from what Suresh said. Firstly, I think pretty much everyone can agree that it was time for a change. I mean, there's really no reason to say that even at the end of 25 years, you can't find anybody else. So Mr. Puri has to be given an extension. I mean, he's had a long run, the longest running bank CEO for sure. So the transition is coming at an appropriate time to your mind, and B, does it matter whether it was first choice or second choice? The RBI, we all know, maintains its internal matrices on top bankers, so it probably used that as a judgment call.
Yeah, I'll come to that. But, just in terms of what Suresh said, I agree with him. I don't think we have any misgivings about the process. My only concern was, view was that the process was, in a sense, thrust upon the bank, which is something which is kind of well documented. Now, coming to this, the other, yeah, sure, Aditya has been there for 25 years. Again, my view in some of these things is that, look, what happens when you've got a long-serving CEO kind of stepping away, and what does it do in terms of, some of the churn which takes place at the senior management level? Again, it's not that if you bring in someone from outside, as when Vishal Sikka was bought it at Infosys, you saw some churn, or when Suresh went into CRISIL, you saw some churn, versus bringing in someone internally. We'll have to wait and watch and see what happens. But look, in these things, as I alluded to, the fact is there are no right answers. You'll know only 4 years from now whether the candidate is good or bad. But having said so, at this moment, we have every reason to expect that, look, the bank has been doing well. You've brought in someone who's familiar with the processes, the systems, how the banks run. Bringing in, it doesn't necessarily mean that bringing in someone from outside is going to shake up things. Just like having an internal candidate cannot make the changes as markets and circumstances change. So we'll just wait and watch. We don't track what is happening in the market, but just when this call began, we looked at it, and the market seems to have given it a thumbs up. So the market has kind of accepted it pretty well. So I think it's a good step. And as I said, time to move on and look to the next 10 years.
Absolutely. Suresh, give us a sense of whether the investor community has had enough interactions with Shashi. Do they know him well? What have you taken away from any interactions that you may have had with him?
Oh yeah, I mean, we have been speaking across investors across the globe, be it US or Europe or Asia for that matter. And Sashi was, of course, the face of the bank after Mr. Puri, and they have taken it pretty well. Of course, the market itself has taken it pretty well. But then investors were of the view that they wanted an internal candidate, especially in an environment where things are very, very uncertain. So that's the first criteria that they had, and the second one was that obviously they were preferred Sashi over anybody else. And I think this perhaps is the favored appointment. Let me put it this way, at least for the investor community per se.
Is he very much, Suresh, if I can stay with you, in the Puri mold? And the Puri mold is defined as cautious to some extent, aggressive when the others are not, focused on liabilities, focused on asset quality, focused on ROEs, ROAs. Is he very much in the Puri mold?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when the digital banking initiative was, of course, launched about 3 years ago, clearly was the one along with Mr. Puri was driving the change, and therefore, of course, he was later on named as the change agent of the bank. Having said that, I think they've also what we hear from a lot of HDFC Bank insiders is that Sashi is a very hard taskmaster. So that also works well, because remember that that the bank has been an enormously well-run execution machine in that sense, delivering quarter after quarter consistent performance. It's very essential that you have that consistency and track record to deliver time and again. And I think Sashi really fits that bill in all those parameters. And of course, he's been trained under Puri, having spent 25, 26 years with him. So, as I said, in the current environment, you really don't want to upset the apple cart. And plus, you also don't want to get a guy from outside who really talks about big things like artificial intelligence and, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, those things in practicality don't work. I mean, India still remains a very high touch market. You need to have 500, 600 branches on the ground. So the guy needs to get his hands and feet dirty, as simple as that. And Sashi is one of those guys who does that, right? So clearly, he's not going to operate sitting out of his headquarters and execute the bank. So in that sense, it's, I think, a reasonably good appointment as well.
Amit, a few concerns have cropped up recently, one being 3 senior level exits, the other one being governance issues at the vehicle loan unit, and the third one actually, that sort of tussle over Altico, which may have been an interpretation issue. Do you take note of those? What's your view?
Look, as I kind of refer to the churn, I think when you've got a long-standing leader, and as you yourself pointed out, Aditya has been there for 25 years, there are going to be some people who are going to leave. If you look at some of the changes, they're all kind of pretty much at retirement age or were there for an extended, for a little bit beyond when they should have retired. So that's kind of par for, something to be expected. I look on the whole vehicle loan thing. It's a little bit unfortunate, and again, at this moment, it's kind of you don't know what is actually playing out. Whether at least if you kind of go back and look at it, some of the changes or the inquiry or the internal investigation or whatever you might call it had happened some time back. The bank probably erred in terms of not not disclosing some of this a little bit earlier, but it wasn't that it was kind of pointed out by the regulators and then the bank stepped into it. So therefore, the bank was aware of it. Maybe they kind of misread how seriously the market will view it. Now, has the market viewed it seriously because there are some other factors at play, whether there's some power play going on? Unfortunately, at this moment, we don't have full color regarding that. But yeah, and Altico, of course, it's true to style. If a bank, and HDFC is kind of prided itself on the fact that their first focus is on recovery. It's always easier to kind of recover and then say sorry or pay a fine, rather than not recover and then figured out that, look, you could have recovered the money and you kind of let it slip between your fingers. So that's kind of pretty much par for course. And I think the market, while they respect them for the fact that they're kind of taking such aggressive views on companies, the focus is on the balance sheet. It's not that, they're favoring someone or they're doing a favor to any company. So that too is kind of sits well with investors at least.
Suresh, what did you make of these 3 issues that came up, and also the stake sale or the share sale from Puri? A lot of people wondered why he was doing that.
Well, I think he already clarified in one of the calls was that 70% of this share sale is going to be invested back into the bank because he has ESOPs which is going to get vested post this retirement. So post-retirement, there is no vesting schedule, it immediately vests. So he needs a large quantum of money. Obviously, we can question whether he should have done exactly in September or whether he could have done in June, July. But let's give the benefit of doubt to him that he's 70 years old. It makes sense for him to exercise all his options right away. And of course, as I said, 70% is going to go back into the bank. And so I won't read too much into Puri vesting it because it was more a requirement to meet his ESOP stuff, which is vesting in October post his retirement. Having said that, look, the compliance lapses era, no organization is immune to it, right? Whether it is ICICI or Axis or any of the other banks in the country, everybody has been fined by Reserve Bank of India at some point or the other for some compliance lapses here and there. So, in a large organization like HDFC Bank, where these kind of compliance lapses would happen, of course, they do get a premium valuation and therefore markets expect them to be completely flawless. But then this can be an isolated incident. I don't think this is all pervasive, that it is prevalent across the organization. That's point number one. And secondly, I think one of the biggest focus for Sashi itself would be that, at the end of the day, Reserve Bank of India really looks when it comes to assess the performance of the CEO, things like compliance and complaints from customers, right? And they're not going to look at an ROA dipping down by 20, 30 basis points and therefore, look, you don't deserve to have a job, or stock price going down 20%. So the objective of the regulator is going to be different. And that's what Sashi is also going to do, that they are going to focus more on compliance and rules and regulations, which is of paramount importance. Everything else becomes secondary. So the process is of paramount importance, and then you can focus on some of the other things. And senior management exits, HDFC Bank is not new to it. They have been having for the last 4 or 5 years quite a lot of people leaving. And look at the performance. I mean, they clearly, when Puri says that they have three deep levels of management to take care of any future exits from the top layers of management, the performance clearly speaks for itself. I mean, people may argue that he's just trying to defend, but then irrespective of whoever has left the bank, the last 4 or 5 years, the performance has been exemplary. So you need to give the benefit of doubt that they have the right kind of leadership to run the various business verticals appropriately.
No, absolutely. Amit, you want to weigh in on the share sale, because I did raise a fair amount of eyebrows, and then I'll get last questions in.
No, it's as Suresh said. At the end of the day, the other way to look at it is, and knowing, the how things are. Aditya could well have said that, look, this is what I've sown and this is what I'll reap, and now I'm kind of going to go ahead and I'm not going to be responsible for what someone does or does not do. And that's one of the ways of looking at it. But as Suresh pointed out, a lot of the money is kind of going back into the stock, and it kind of gives him the flexibility which he needs when he's kind of at this stage. So I don't think we should read too much into it. The thing with all these, large organizations is that you can kind of layer it, and there you can nuance it and kind of discuss it to death. But sometimes it's the simplest explanation which works the best.
No, that's true. All right. Just to close off the discussion, Suresh, to you, this 20% growth Excel formula that HDFC Bank has worked with, at some point that will have to change, right? I mean, the bank is 10 lakh crore plus on advances, 11.5 lakh crore on deposits. It's tough to keep growing at that pace at this size. The market will be open to a slight shift under Shashi, whether it's in terms of numbers, guidance, or even direction.
See, unfortunately, Sashi is also inheriting the bank at a point in time where clearly we are going through once in 100-year phenomenon, right? So, you have to really not ignore the market forces. At the end of the day, HDFC Bank is a part of the system, and if the system is growing at 5%, and in case the COVID vaccines are not in place or whatever could be the issue, the system continues to linger around 5-6% kind of a credit growth for the next couple of years. Eventually, HDFC Bank will also have a lower trajectory. Point year era, which we have to try to understand, is whether they can gain market share. That is, can they grow at a pace which is much faster than the system, and whether they can outperform their peers. That's what we should look at, rather than looking at an absolute growth number and get fixated to that 20%. If the system is growing at 5%, and if you're growing at 15%, you are doing way better than everybody else, and therefore you need to give them the credit and not really get fixated by 20%. And that's what I think they will do. I mean, they will not take any growth into their portfolio which compromises their underwriting standards, asset quality, or margins. It has to be profitable, and it should confine to their standards. So if it is 15%, so be it.
Fair enough. Amit, last question to you, slightly more sector focused. Is this the last of the 25-year banking CEOs, given that the RBI seems fairly convinced that they want to shorten their tenures? Are we done with the long stint Indian banker story?
I think that's the way it's heading. We all have a view in terms of there's some research which has been published and which was out in the Indian Express a couple of days back, which kind of did speak about the fact that there's no evidence that cutting short the tenure of the CEO is better. I would say that, look, while 3 years certainly doesn't work, we have to turn around and see that, look, some of the longer serving CEOs have done their job, but it seems RBI is made up their mind. And again, if you were to look at the papers today, it seems to be that this is where they're heading. So I think we're going to kind of, this is a once in a lifetime phenomenon which we've seen, that someone continuing for about 25 years. In fact, the history of private sector banks in India, or the new private sector banks in India, could well be the path which Aditya Puri is taken. After that, it will be, everyone can be defined in terms of shorter eras rather than the entire the entire time frame from beginning to I mean, just now if you were to write the history of the private sector banks in India, it could well be you could coincide the two and they'd both weave in together. It's not going to happen after this.
No, absolutely. I think Mr. Kamath comes close but fell short, and Mr. Uday Kotak will also.
Uday is there. Uday, of course, kind of transcends. So he's kind of with the NBFC, he's been with the bank. So he would kind of overlap two eras, but in a different sense. But Aditya has been a unique tenure.
Absolutely. I'll close it off there. Suresh, Amit, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us with a last minute request. It is a big moment for not just HDFC Bank, but for Indian banking. Longest running bank CEO stepping down after a successful stint going by the numbers for sure. Thanks for watching.
Bye.